live here. It says that I am. Hello, everybody, and good morning. Thanks for being patient as we get everything kicked off here. I'm Stephanie Donahue, and today we're going to be talking about 5 tips for successfully engaging your first-line workforce. So thanks for joining. This is the keynote for the Digital Modernization track at the M365 Chicago conference. So excited to be here today. And I did want to warn you guys, I know with the Q&A, I don't have a dedicated moderator, so I'm going to try to keep an eye on the Q&A and answer questions as I can with the flow of the presentation. If for some reason I don't get to you, I'll make sure to circle back at the end. I'll also post into the team afterwards. So if you guys want to engage with me there, if you have any other questions or something that I didn't get to, because we are going to be a little short on time today, I'll try to address that all later. So just wanted to make sure and let you guys know that up front. You know, I really wanted to cover the first line workforce because I don't see a whole lot of conversation around this yet. And it's something that me and my team, we've been working on, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. We kind of came into this for the first time with our particular consulting crew. And what I watched over the course of a couple of years was a global organization that truly took themselves from, you know, they were the auto industry. They had come out of a really big slump. You guys know what kind of happened with the auto industry. And as they kind of came out of that and they had the money to invest back in the business again, they really decided to put a big commitment forward to improving communications globally across the company. And so what we got to witness was this incredible transformation, really not just for their corporate people, but they were dedicated to getting corporate communications out all the way to the plant floor. And it was an incredible transformation. And they really went from these like legacy clunky systems, you know, .NET intranets and things that were not mobile accessible and having to use VPN for everything, all the way to having mobile forms on the plant floor and real-time dashboards. And they did all of that in under 2 years. And so that's really the kind of the story I want to talk about today is like, how do you take this piece by piece, all of these opportunities, all of this really great technology and get it out to your first line workforce? And it seems daunting up front, but it's really not as bad as it seems. So we're going to talk through that today, give you guys 5 tips for getting there, for taking those steps towards really making your first line workforce more productive and really modernizing the way that they work. So before we get started, I did want to give you a quick background on me and who I am. Again, Stephanie Donahue. I own a company and co-founded it called Pate Group, and we do Office 365 consulting. And we spend a ton of time with customers, just like yourself, where we kind of start from scratch and we say, how do we get you to the cloud and what's the best strategy? And so we spend a ton of time in this space. I am a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP as well, and I'm involved in the mentorship program at Microsoft, and I also do quite a bit of blogging and podcasting. My podcast is called Techsplaining. So quick background on who I am, and if you have any questions or anything for me personally directly, hit me up after the presentation. So digging back in, I did want to touch briefly, oh, and I gotta change my slide here. I did want to touch briefly on what is digital modernization, because I think there's actually 2 different tracks here at M365 Chicago. There's one for transformation, and there's another one for modernization. And so I'm not going to read this word for word on the screen here, but did want to touch on the difference. And just, you know, very briefly, transformation is really about kind of getting that buy-in from the organization. You really, if you're going to transform the way your organization works, you thrive on change. You have to get people to buy into working a new way. And so it's really kind of this higher level conceptual idea that you're going to change the way you work. You put a strategic roadmap together, you set goals. So really that's kind of the transformation side of things. When we talk about modernization and digital modernization, it's really kind of the boots on the ground. How do we actually take that transformation plan and act on it? How do we modernize each piece of our legacy systems, because what we're trying to do is modernize our operations, our infrastructure, and we're trying to get rid of all those clunky old systems that are hard to maintain. Sometimes it's hard to find employees that will support them, and even down to just a basic .NET intranet, right? You might have the developers to maintain it, but forever it's been a bottleneck because the normal business user cannot go update even a simple news article or a link on the homepage. And so there's this bottleneck of how do we get more dynamic updates to the homepage if we're constantly funneling things through IT? And that's kind of how things used to go. We really want to get away from that. So this presentation is really about, getting into the nitty-gritty of what are the precise systems. I am going to touch on planning a little bit, but we're really going to dive into what changes should we be looking for and making with our applications and our legacy systems. So just a real quick touch on that, just so we kind of level set on what that means. So what is a first-line worker? And hopefully all of you are familiar with this term, but if you aren't, really is talking about those that very simply don't sit at a desk all day. They may spend some time at a desk, but more often they're in front of other people, they're out performing tasks. So when we say, what is a first-line worker, we're talking about people like an attendant on an airline, on healthcare organizations where you have nurses and you have doctors and you have assistants where they're kind of interacting with people directly. They're in front of you, kind of asking questions and engaging with you and assisting you with something that you need. And on the flip side of that, you also have task workers, and you're going to have folks that are at manufacturing plants. Maybe they're checking the product that your company creates. They're actually on the line looking at that product, making adjustments, looking for quality issues. And so you really have these people that are day-to-day, extremely engaged, very important to your organization, but they form a very different role and a very different purpose within your organization than those of you that are in a corporate office. So we are looking at those people that have additional challenges as it relates to how they engage with technology, because it's not as easy as just sitting at your desk and having access to something. This access has to be mobile. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be easy. And one of the examples I have of this, actually, when I was just first getting started in IT, I worked a help desk for a healthcare organization. And so a lot of my internal customers were nurses. And I had a nurse that came in, she handed me this completely busted laptop. She told me it had been run over by a car. And I was like, oh, okay. Did you leave it on the top of the car? And it you took off and it fell off, because that's kind of what it looked like. It was totally destroyed. And she looked me straight in the face and said, nope, I put it behind my tire and I backed over it. And I thought, what? Why would you do that? And she was frustrated. This is 15 years ago. She had a touchscreen laptop. So this top of the line technology, $2,000 laptop 15 years ago. It was an expensive piece of equipment. And she literally put it under her tire and backed over it because she was so frustrated. And I thought for sure this woman was going to be fired. I had never seen such a thing. I thought it was ridiculous. And what ended up happening was that she was so valued in her organization. She was a hospice nurse. It's a hard job. And she was so valued that they were like, she's one of our best nurses. Just switch her to paper. And they switched her to paper. They gave her a data entry person. And she went on her way and did her job. She was only liable for $200 of the laptop based on the way they insure those nurses. And it really hit me hard because it was an acknowledgement of how highly valuable that worker was, that it takes a very particular personality to be able to do what that first line worker did. She works with people that are dying. And so her priority is not her laptop. Her priority is people. And it should be based on what she does. But IT in that case had failed her because her job was not easy enough on that laptop. And granted, there's always going to be a spectrum of people who are able to more effectively engage with technology. but she wasn't able to get her job done in a way that she could just get in there, do her data entry and get out. She was super frustrated. And so that's what happens, maybe not to that extreme, but you do have people that are less engaged with their job. They're not as happy with their job. And so you have this like gap of that job satisfaction that you really need to have, especially with first-line workers, because the turnover is a little higher. So just something to keep in mind that as you look at rolling things out to the first line, our job is really not just to give them something functional, but also something that's really easy to use because they are so important to our business. And this, I actually borrowed this slide from a Microsoft deck, and I thought it was really good. Most of our business leaders see empowering first-line workers as being really important. So just like in the example I gave you, they recognized that this person was really valuable to their organization. So I don't know that that's ever necessarily been the problem, but also much like that example, we kind of in IT have this like idea like they're not going to use it anyway. They don't want to change the way they work, especially, that woman in particular struggled with technology. And so we kind of had this, like, we kind of left them for last in terms of upgrades and modernizations, simply because we felt like they just couldn't do it. And what we're finding in terms of surveying those first line workers, they are indicating that they don't have the right technology to do their job. And what's happening is we see this proliferation of other systems, Facebook groups, so that they can communicate on WhatsApp applications and messaging applications. And so kind of a problem here because we drug our feet for so long. They are adopting technology. If you're not giving them something to work with, they're working around it. And that's definitely a concern for the business in your organization, if that potentially intellectual property is leaving the organization. I'm going to pause real quick just to make sure I don't have any questions. Okay. So since turnover is such a big issue, we want that engaged employee. We want that higher job satisfaction. And so we need to start looking at what are the pieces and parts of the things that maybe frustrate them throughout their day. And so it's time to give them a little love, and just a couple quick ideas here on, what to look for. They might be feeling disconnected because they're not getting rapid communications. The global company I spoke about at the very beginning, right? They didn't have a way to reach their manufacturing plants in other countries effectively because they weren't receiving global communications. They weren't getting it from the internet. Maybe they're not sitting at a desk where they could check the intranet. Some of them were not really connected as well. The internet connections weren't great. And so, they're relying on things coming over more slowly. They were printing things and putting them up on the boards in the office. But it really kind of, getting that push level of notification doesn't allow you to truly engage and to know how others outside of your direct location, you don't know how anyone else feels about something, about an announcement, about a change in benefits or something like that. So they end up feeling really disconnected. There's also fragmented support because you have this variety of mobile and desktop and old systems. I know a lot of people still trying to get off those Windows 7 desktops and things like that. You still see flip phones out there running around sometimes. So you have this like fragmented, how can you effectively support those first line workers if they're constantly, dealing with old devices and different types of devices, and the support is not as effective. You also have outdated processes. We often see safety data sheets and things like that, the work instructions, SOPs, they're printed out. Sometimes they're in binders. A lot of times, if you're not real careful, you can have the wrong version of something posted. So you have to be really conscious of, hey, when that email came over with the new policy, did we get it posted? Did we print it right away? Did we remember to put it up? Did we remember to take the other one down and all of the locations in our plant that we needed to remember? So at the end of the day, what that creates is like this kind of like slow, the world is working so fast now, and we really need to kind of catch up our first line workers with with the way the rest of the world is working now. And that's a huge benefit to your business, even though sometimes it can be a little bit of an undertaking. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's putting that first line worker at risk for not being engaged, having that lower job satisfaction, and ultimately leaving the organization when that's really not what we want. We want to keep all of that knowledge that they've gained and the experience, and we want to keep that within our organization. It'll be really helpful to us long term. So the what does that mean, right? What does that look like when we start translating all of that to modernization? Now that we know kind of what we're looking for and the reason we need to be looking for it, what does that mean in terms of the types of change that we're going to see? And we're going to, first and foremost, the working from anywhere at any time. Of course, that applies to Firstline, but it's really applied to the rest of us. We've all dealt with that here lately with quarantine and COVID and everyone working remote. And for the first time, we saw a giant push into the cloud. I think Microsoft has been pushing numbers that, things are so much higher in terms of percentage for how quickly organizations have moved to the cloud. And what that means is that now we've got everybody over there from the corporate side. And now we're kind of looking to say, hey, this worked pretty well. How do we get this into our first line as well? And we're getting there faster than we expected because of that big push in the last year to get everyone else there first. So we really want to start rethinking, what does productivity look like as it relates to our first line workers? That's the first and foremost, that's the first thing we're going to go looking for. Second, we want to reach and engage remote employees quickly. So we want to be able for them to not just receive push notifications or announcements. We want them to come back into the system and really be able to comment on things, to engage with each other, to collaborate as it relates to something as simple as a quality issue on a manufacturing plant floor. Imagine having the collaboration tools to work directly with corporate and those that are designing those solutions and those tools and those products to be able to go one-to-one with them, to be able to share pictures. So just really strengthening that culture and that trust between those on the plant floor or those out in the field and the construction, to be able to have them engage with the corporate office more effectively and across, with each other in the field or with each other globally across different plants. We also want to look at replacing slow paper-based processes with digital forms, real-time dashboards. I talked a little bit about that up front with the manufacturing plants and being able to, really transform their data by saying, instead of having to consolidate all of this data entry from all of their audit forms, they were able to push that into real-time dashboards. It's a game changer in terms of working faster, making better decisions. So really looking at how to digitize that business process. I mean, even something as simple as going to your doctor's office. And, how many times have you been to the doctor's office? I had the same doctor, right? 15 years, live in the same place, live in the same house, live in the same city with the same insurance. And I still had to sit there and fill out that paperwork, the same paperwork every single year, just to have them check it in the system and go, yep, it's the same. Talk about frustrating customer experience. We've changed all of that now. I was back in that same doctor's office a month ago, and of course they had digitized everything. They had brought it all into the system on, no more paper because of COVID. And I'm like, silver linings to this, right? It's something that's been a long time coming. And that's a simple example, but it applies across the board to any industry. Better customer experience, happier customers. You're going to have a better business. Also looking at devices, there are a lot of mobile devices now, not just desktops, but mobile. They might be a kiosk, there might be a shared login. Sometimes we're allowing bring your own device, tablets and phones. We're really looking to protect our organization now as well. We've got all this information, cloud accessible, lots of devices, and now we're pushing those devices. They're running all over the company, they're leaving the organization, they're outside of a VPN. Those are things we also need to look at. And finally, just engaging workers, understanding that as we transform the way they work, We also need to consider their different educational backgrounds and skill levels and languages, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts your approach to training and upskilling employees. There's a lot of assumptions we make on baseline skills for a corporate office that we can't make those assumptions for our first line workers. So all this to say, essentially, kind of all bets are off in terms of your common expectations for how to implement this kind of technology in the office, and really rethinking the way that that gets applied out into the field. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly, is the planning process. And we do definitely need to understand our business needs before we jump into this. A lot of times in IT, I can't tell you how many times I hear, oh, we know what the business needs. They're not going to understand. But I promise you, if you don't talk to the business, it's not going to slow you down as much as you think. It's actually going to speed you up because you'll have less iterations of issues. You'll have more user buy-in, and they're really going to get excited about what you're doing. So when we talk to the business, we want to look for that low-hanging fruit. You want to have that conversation about, I know it's like a little cliche, I guess, term, but you really want to start with that low effort, big impact project, work your way into the larger projects and phases. You don't want to take that, even though it's tempting to take that really big project first because it might be really painful. It might be best to get smaller projects, smaller groups of people introduced to things like Microsoft Teams, introduced to SharePoint Online, introduced to mobile engagement before you really take on that big effort where you really need their full buy-in. So the other thing I always say too is that don't try to plan 2 years worth of work. Things in the cloud are changing too quickly, and you're really going to be, you're going to have to kind of rework your plan anyway. So we kind of plan in 3 to 6 month chunks, maybe kind of say roadmap out what's next after this piece. But you may plan for something that you think you have to customize only to find out something's rolled out that's going to take care of that for you in 6 months. So don't get ahead of yourself, really try to break things down into pieces and work in phases. I'm also a big fan of proof of concepts. Once you get those initial ideas of things that you really want to implement, do a baseline, like an MVP, meaning minimum viable product, get something in their hands and get them using it, because that approach is going to allow them to better envision what you're trying to get them to do so that they can give you their actual requirements instead of what they think they want. And the best example I could come up with for this, my husband keeps harping on me to research to get a new car. First world problems, I know, right? But my car's old. It has like 150,000 miles on it and the power steering is terrible. So do I want a new car? Absolutely, right? But the challenge is, he didn't really ask what's most important to me. And actually, when it comes down to it, the one thing that's most important to me, I can't research, which is why I refuse to do the research. I'm small, I'm 5'2", and I have to sit in the car to make sure it feels right. I have to be comfortable, like I'm short. I need to see over the steering wheel. I need to be able to see around me. And being a shorter profile, cars aren't necessarily made for shorter people. In the same sense, they're not necessarily made for really tall people, right? And so for someone like me, I actually have to sit in the car and test drive it. And until that point, I don't even know if it's going to work. So why bother doing all that research until I get in the car and at least know baseline, it feels good to me. And I think a lot of times with first line workers, it's similar. You're going to have a scenario, these are hands-on people and they don't work with this technology and they have paper processes. You need to get something in front of them for them to feel and use and understand before they can really truly give you what they want from it. Because otherwise you're just kind of building something in hopes that it's kind of what they're looking for when they can't even envision what you're talking about. I have a fun fact on the side that I discovered going back to that car example. If you kind of plan for something because you think someone needs it, right? What kind of car would you buy for a person who's 7'4"? You're thinking a large vehicle, right? Well, in fact, someone I used to know, he's 7'4", and his car is a Mini Cooper. And do you know why? Because it has the most room on the inside of the vehicle. And that just blew my mind. But it's the same thing that you're doing when you're planning these engagements, these proof of concepts. Like, you've got to get your hands on it, because if you're making assumptions based on what you see, you don't truly understand what the need is, and you could make bad assumptions. So keep that in mind as you're doing your planning. Really get hands on, especially with your first line workers. It's going to take you a long way. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this particular slide, but I got ahead of myself here. One of the things I wanted to mention as you do that planning, a lot of times I hear first line workers, it's too expensive. We don't have the money for first line workers. We can't license everyone. And it's because there's this assumption that we've given our corporate people E1 or E3 or whatever plan you have, that you have to give that same license out to your first line workers. So those that are in the field, those in the plant floor, and that's not true. So this is a quick breakdown. There is an F1 and F3 license. So that F3 license is really pretty full. You can see Teams is on here. That's a lot of the concern. Well, if I give them a first line worker license, do they actually still have access to SharePoint? Yes. Will they have access to Teams? Yes. Will they have access to Power Apps? Yes. Well, if you do the F3, right? So like, you don't have to buy that full license. And so you really want to make sure, go back, rerun your numbers. If this felt out of reach for you to begin with, make sure to go back and double check that after the fact, but now, so that you can kind of go back and redo your planning. If F3 or F1 is still out of reach for you, there are some third-party tools that still sit on Microsoft technologies that run a little less expensive, but they're going to be limited in comparison to going ahead and making that investment in the F license. So that's all I wanted to say on this. I'm not going to go into details. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that as you go through this process, you really want to consider that. Okay, so I know I've got about 25 minutes here, so I got to move a little faster with you guys. The first thing we're going to do after our planning, the easy win, typically is the communications side of things. How do we get better communications out to our first line? How do we make it easy for them to come in, consume content, to find out what's going on in the organization, and to make sure that it's targeted for them? One thing we often hear with communications is like, if I'm on the plant floor, I'm out and I'm a nurse on the floor, or I'm out at a different remote location, maybe there's something that I can't participate in that everyone else is doing, right? Jeans day on Friday. Well, I'm a nurse. I have to wear scrubs all the time. Thanks, but no thanks. And that's something that's like a kind of demoralizing thing. Like, wow, corporate office gets all these benefits and we don't have cake in the break room, and we can't wear jeans. And, those sorts of things really kind of are a bummer for those employees. And so being able to target what announcements come out to them is also super important. This is something that you can do as simple as SharePoint Online. You can get a basic intranet up and running. Hopefully everybody's looking at that already. But again, if you've got that F license, you can have them in your SharePoint environment, getting those announcements, having them targeted, and then also having links to tools, links to resources that are available, things like getting out to safety data sheets, linking out to other applications like Workday for HR, being able to access training videos from a quick link, and also just being able to embed stream videos. So maybe there's a CEO town hall, and a lot of first line workers are on a shift, and if their shift is on, they can't be sitting there watching the CEO town hall because they have a job to do. So they could come back in later, watch those stream videos that are posted, catch up and still feel engaged, and have the ability to engage and ask questions, because you can add commenting to articles, you can add commenting to the videos that are posted. And so it still gives them a chance to come in, ask questions, and feel like they're participating with everyone else. Content is really important. So you're also linking to policies, work instructions, and things like that. So, just really making it easy, rolling out a simple intranet, making it targeted for those users, super important, and should be pretty straightforward for most organizations to be able to take advantage of SharePoint Online. And now that you can take that home page from SharePoint Online and embed it into Microsoft Teams, you can have that home button. Now they also have the best of both worlds from Microsoft Teams as well. The other thing I wanted to mention, kind of along the same lines here, let me get back to, come on. It's not advancing. There we go. All right. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I just came across this here in the past week or so, but there is actually out on GitHub, there is something called a Teams sample hub and is geared towards the first line worker. So it's like a pre-baked, I hate to use the word template because you can't just, it does take provisioning to be able to deploy this into the environment. So like using Visual Studio. But it's essentially a template that you can deploy into your environment. And I do recommend testing that. If you have a test environment, do it there first. But you can deploy it in the environment and you have a first line worker focused hub. So not only do you have a corporate communications area, you could actually just pull those news announcements and surface them here instead. So if you wanted to deploy this, again, you could have this kind of, it's just a very simple landing page, but it's surfacing things that are more relevant to your first line worker. So something like their shift or the corporate announcements that, again, targeted only apply to those first line workers. But it's really kind of a much better focused way of getting them their relevant information and helping them feel like it's personalized or customized to their role rather than just seeing what everybody else sees on corporate. So I did want to pull that up real quick here for you guys. If you go out to that GitHub site, it gives you a full rundown. There's step-by-step instructions in the README on how to deploy this. And if you look, there's more than just the screenshots I pulled. This is a very long, you see here on the side, if you want to go out and look at this, there's a whole bunch of examples here. So I'm going to go through this quickly since I'm a little low on time. We need to keep moving, but I did want to let you guys know this is out here. This is something you can play around with and really get customized. I think this is great. It's something our team's going to be looking into. And hopefully by the next time I do a session like this, I'll be able to demo it. Like I said, it is pretty new, at least it's the first time I've seen it here in the past week. So pretty cool stuff. And I think they're really headed the right direction with how to better target links, communications, and shift-based information into that first line worker group of workers. We're still talking communications here as it relates to some of the new features in Microsoft Teams as well. So with Microsoft Teams, not only do you have the teams and the channels for chat, but you also, if you have Androids, you can enable the walkie-talkie feature. So just as you would imagine, it works just like a walkie-talkie. It's like a press-to-talk thing. Again, that's not something I could pull up and play around with. I happen to have an iPhone. The iOS version of this is still in development. So anxiously awaiting that functionality for us as well, but do go look at that, go play around with it. It's an interesting thing that you can do. So maybe you prefer to talk instead of typing something out. That's a really good option. And the other thing you can do is when you create a team, you can also pin a channel. You probably use that functionality, kind of pulls it to the top of your desktop Teams app. Well, from the mobile experience, you also have the ability to turn on pinned channels as a chat. So you'll see here, this is my chat here. And right above it are all my pinned channels. And now I can go into my pinned channels and not have to do that thing where I go to Teams and then I find my team and then I find my channel and then I have to click it. So it's like it's just a quick access link into that channel's conversation. I think this is great, and in the direction they're trying to go here, back to that WhatsApp example I gave earlier, trying to replace those non-approved tools that we've heard stories about, the Facebook groups and WhatsApp. We're trying to get people to have easy conversations in the correct place in Microsoft Teams Mobile, and that's really what that setting is about. So I love these new features. It's something that I actually, this is my actual device here, that screenshot, because I thought, gosh, that'll actually be pretty convenient for me as well. Okay. So next, I want to touch on modernizing your legacy processes and applications and just give you some examples of how you can do that in Office 365. So you may have a lot of your work instructions, standard operating procedures. Maybe you've moved them into SharePoint at this point for management, and maybe or maybe not some of your first line workers, a lot of managers probably have access into those policies. The trouble is that those tend to be buried into folders. And in the case of what's on my screen here, this is folders that are organized by department, which kind of makes sense for their policies, but they used abbreviations. And as a new employee, you're just not going to understand like, what does FIN mean? It might be finance, but I'm not sure, especially if I'm a young employee. I don't necessarily know what departments an organization typically has. So being able to kind of take that experience or, gosh, if you're still on binders, right, lots of room for improvement there. But being able, this is a Power App here. And so being able to just start typing in this vendor or affiliate list, being able to filter it, it's the same thing as a SharePoint or an Excel list, right? It filters the same way. But the idea is that rather than going to a folder and a folder and a folder and a folder, that you can very quickly pull things up with metadata. You can do this with a Power App. That Power App can still work for those that are working from a desktop, but is also able to be pulled up on that mobile device. So if you have someone who needs to pull up work instructions while they're in the field or while they're on the plant floor, they can very quickly access that information, be able to pull it up in a secure way. And you don't have to worry about them having printed something, it's the wrong version, that it's real time, up to date, and approved. And it literally happens the second that it's published. So there's no downtime in between, no mistakes made, and you're really improving efficiency when you work like that. So we want to look for those useful applications. We want to get outside of just improving basic communications and providing links. We really want to help transform how that organization works, what applications they're engaging with, and kind of giving them, like I said, it goes back to being easy. Is it way easier to pull up your Power App on your mobile device, pull up a quick search, find something quickly and pull it up, than to have to go back to your desk and pull up SharePoint, dig through folders? This is way easier. So think about even simple applications for things that you don't even think, well, we already have it in SharePoint. How can we improve on that? There's always room for improvement, and definitely being able to make it mobile is really helpful. So other ideas, some you don't have to create everything. If that's not your style, there are a lot of options out of the box now. You can modernize applications just simply by implementing shifts from Microsoft Teams. So if you haven't seen that yet, you have a shift-based organization. Definitely go out to Teams, enable shifts, take a look at it. It is fairly simple, straightforward. They continue to add features to it, but something as simple as being able to go log in, see the shifts that I'm working all week, being able to see who might be available to switch me shifts without having to call around to a bunch of people, and being able to do all of that on my mobile device. Super quick, super easy, all totally built into Microsoft Teams. So that's definitely a big focus, I think, moving forward for Microsoft, is to continue to build on being able to work with shift-based people and to continue to enhance that that feature within Microsoft Teams. So that's something you can find. If you don't see shifts at the bottom of your mobile device on Teams, go to that More button, and you can probably find it within there. And if you don't see it, you might need to enable something, but that's where you look for it. The other thing you can do is modernize your task tracking and management. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is now available within Microsoft Teams. So you do have the ability to track your tasks through Planner and through the To-Do app, and to be able to consolidate all of that into one screen and to be able to access that. So that this is kind of Microsoft's solution for telling you if you have task tracking to do for your first line workers, this is where they want you to be. They want you in here and utilizing this super simple, easy interface. Add a task. There it goes. Add a task. Be able to see where it's coming from and to be able to go in there. You can sort out things that are important, checklist items, things like that. So it's something that is super simple, but I don't even see a lot of office folks, corporate office, using it yet. So I'd love to see that shift. And also, I think as we begin to build out Microsoft Teams for our first line, this is going to be an area to watch because it's so easy to use and easy to track things. And I know a lot of first line workers have those checklists that they need to run through while they're out in the field or out on the plant floor, things they need to do every day, repeating tasks, being able to reassign something. So you'll see there's an assign to me now. Lots of really good features that have I feel like it's been a long time coming to bring it into Teams, but very, very helpful. So the other thing we often see a need for is the staff directory. And again, we're not customizing anything. This is kind of a built-in feature. You can go out now and look for the Who app. It's WHO. And you can pull it directly in from the store. There's no additional cost. And all it's doing is accessing Active Directory and pulling back a card, an information card about a person. So this is Mark. I just said, who is Mark Rackley? And it pulls him in. And, you basically have a full staff directory in your pocket now where you can go find people, you can give them a call, you can email, you can message directly from here. So that's all out of the box stuff, right? You don't have to build a bunch of custom applications. You can use Teams, you can use the staffing app, you can use task management, you can use the staff directory, this Who app. So you have a lot of options just to roll out, even if you don't have anyone on staff who's comfortable doing those customizations. Now, if you do have staff, you have a lot of opportunities here for building out your custom apps. I'm on a mission to replace spreadsheets, for example. Spreadsheets easily translate into a SharePoint list, which easily translate into using the wizard to build a Power App. And very quickly, if it's simple, you can literally translate a spreadsheet into a SharePoint list and a Power App within a matter of an hour or less, right? That's simplifying. There's probably more complicated things you might want to add, logic and things like that to your form, but it could be that simple to get off of kind of that basic clunky tracking that we're doing. And again, using those SharePoint lists to feed into Power BI, or long term you could move it into a database. But what we want to do is kind of get to the point where we have that real-time data so that we can make decisions throughout the organization. And you can't do that with 20 different spreadsheets. they don't feed, they don't talk to each other. It's really where the dashboards become really critical. So what can you do for different scenarios? We get a lot of questions about this because it's not necessarily straightforward. Something like internal employees, an example might be, we have a nursing continuing education application that we want to create. That's something that's only internal. We have a basic submission process, we have attachments, and we have a basic approval workflow. That's super easy to throw into Power Apps and Power Automate flows, and that's something that really could work well. So we look for those opportunities also to integrate with line of business systems. Since you're internal, Power Apps has hundreds of connectors, and Flow the same. You have lots of connectors to get back into those line of business systems. Now, if you do have the scenario, though, where it's not all internal, you have guest users. We did run into that a lot with large global companies. A lot of times in manufacturing, we'll have partnerships or like joint ventures where they're kind of sort of under the same umbrella, but they're sort of competitive. And so they don't have the same tenant and they have different areas to log in. So in those scenarios, if you need to work together, something like the Power Apps portal is going to be a better experience because you're still requiring a login. However, you have the ability to do that guest user access. So slightly different. You can't do that external user, that guest user in Power Apps, but you can do it in the Power Apps portal. So that's your answer for that. And then if you have anonymous access, in this example here, it's a hotel person. Maybe you need to have them do a COVID survey before they check into the hotel. That person's not going to have a login. So you really can't, there's not a good option using Office 365, like from a Power Apps or Power Automate perspective, but you could also put that into something like an Azure Static website. That's what we did for a couple because it was quick, easy, and low cost, and a very basic form, filled it out, and then they have anonymous access they were using for that. So in our case, it wasn't actually a hotel, but it was people checking in folks to a parking lot. They had to kind of check people in as they come in. So again, something that's quick, easy, but no login. We still had a scenario where we could get them set up as well. So it just kind of depends on, talk through your requirements, see what's possible. There's always an answer. It just may not be part of that Office 365 stack. So lots of options there. Okay, done 8 minutes. I'm gonna keep moving here. Okay, so there we go. Next, we want to talk about modernizing your identity. So at the beginning, we touched on the fact that we've got all these mobile devices running around. We really need to get a hold of, making sure that we're locking down that data, making sure that our intellectual property is protected. Again, we do have people that have differing level of skills. They have a different level of understanding on how to secure data. It really should, again, make it easy for them. If VPN's required, and that's kind of been a barrier for a while, so the login, it's clunky. You have to get into VPN first and then get to the intranet. It takes a while. I'd rather just do it my way and print it out, kind of thing. That's really where like multi-factor authentication comes in. You have other built-in security features in 365 as well, so that you can do things like only domain joined devices have access, and that's something that also keep an eye out for. Container policies. You can set access to Microsoft Teams based on whether or not that device is domain joined. So there's some things like that coming. I don't know if it's quite rolled out yet, but keep an eye out for it because it's really going to help you out with security access, and again, making it easy. Somebody couldn't go home, log into that their own mobile device with Teams and get to something, right? So we have lots of layers of security available in 365 to look at before you really need to start looking at third-party tools now. And you also may want to skip those legacy password rules that make really complicated passwords. We really don't need that now that we have a lot of these other security features. And that's actually, I know it's hard to believe, Microsoft does have a published document that says to skip the legacy password craziness with complexities and resets and really depend more heavily on these other policies and multi-factor authentication for sure. Other things you can do, easy ways to log in. You do have the ability to sign in with a phone number instead of a username. So that's kind of a cool thing. You don't have to, if you're only logging in once a week or once a month, really hard to remember what was my username, what was that really complicated password. You have the ability to just put your phone number in, super simple. You can use things like Windows Hello, where you hold the laptop up in front of your face, it knows who you are, it logs you in. Things like that really ease the use of being able to engage with the technology without having that barrier of remembering all that information. And we also have device pins now as well. So just remembering a short pin number might be something that a user could do more easily than those usernames and passwords. As far as shared devices go, you can use some automatic logout features that will help with ensuring that employees are not sharing their accounts. Really a big push for Microsoft to encourage the use of those unique logins per individual worker where possible. So I know kiosk is typically where that comes up. So again, if we have it auto logging out and we have the login being quick and easy, hopefully it encourages that behavior where they're logging in under their own identity, and it's much easier to know what's going on and who did what. And especially if you're engaging in teams, you don't want to be logged in as a generic account. It's kind of a risk if someone were to post something that they shouldn't have posted, and then you kind of have to guess who did it. So especially as you start allowing some of those messaging communications, super important for them to be in as themselves. And then one other barrier is not as much, it's kind of identity related, just in the fact that based on who you are as a person when you log in, you may be able to do some targeting. There's multilingual coming out functionality where it can be targeted for those that don't speak English as their primary language. So you know, if you have remote manufacturing plants, something that came up for us, we didn't realize that even though English was the official corporate language, their remote manufacturing plants were not English by default. That wasn't the case, and in fact, many of them did not speak any English. And that was because those are regional, local manufacturing plants, and so that was just an expectation. So they were never able to come in and view those corporate communications. Keep an eye out for the multilingual functionality that's rolling out. That's just yet another barrier that we can remove based on who you are as a person. Being able to come in and engage in your native language is a really, really important thing. So last, I want to touch on training. And there again, it's something that should be individualized. I hate hearing it should be so easy, they don't need training. It's not a good philosophy. You really need to, it's still an enterprise content management system. It is an enterprise messaging system. I'm not talking about pulling people out for 40 hours, like a full week for training. That's not what I'm referring to. But I do think you should do a lunch and learn, revisit things at least quarterly to make sure that you're removing barriers for people as they learn these new applications. So providing short training sessions on a regular basis is going to be far more effective than trying to force feed all of the things fire hose style in a couple of days. So being able to do that, being able to record training sessions so that they can go back to them later, also very helpful. But keeping in mind too that your training for that first line is going to be different than the way you approach it in the office. And one of the realities for me when we started into this was that some of those remote locations, and in our case, it was a remote manufacturing plant in South America, and they didn't even have internet at home. I tried to explain. I was like, well, just give them the internet site, because it's very basic. It works just like MSN.com. And they were like, yeah, they don't have that at home. Like they don't have that same experience you do. This is about 4 years ago. So that was a reality check for me that, you know, we're privileged here that we have all these things and they're readily available, and we don't even think about the fact that we just know how to use those sites. My 10-year-old knows how to use that site, but we have those in other countries who don't have the internet access that we have, and that don't have the computers and the devices and all of that. So we do need to keep in mind and ask those questions when we engage with those remote employees, that we make sure and understand what their needs are and adopt our training to that directly. So just something to keep in mind. And to wrap up, I think we've got about a minute left here. Hopefully you've gotten something out of the session today, but the whole idea here is to modernize your planning, make sure you're understanding your first line workers' needs, or rethinking that productivity, modernizing communications, strengthening the culture of your organization by enabling ways for them to engage with the organization directly and not just through their manager. Modernizing legacy processes and applications, so digitizing all of those little, you know, it could be something as simple as implementing staffing or the staff directory or things like that. It doesn't have to be all custom and from scratch when you first get started. Modernize your identity, make sure you're protecting your data while at the same time removing barriers for making it easier for them to engage. And last but not least, modernize your approach to training. Make sure you're training and upskilling your employees, but approaching it in a way that's appropriate for the skill level and the location and exactly the types of first line workers that you're directly working with. So, all right, well, hopefully you all stuck with me through that. I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you all very much for coming today. And I am, like I mentioned, I'll go out into the team and drop something out there if you guys have questions. So thanks everyone for coming.